Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale, Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. My special guest today is Tim Schlanghecke. Tim, welcome.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so Tim, we talked previously to this interview and you were going through your career in Japan. It's an outstanding and varied career, unbelievably varied career. I think when I look at that list of things you've done here, you're like a Renaissance man, so many different things. But we're talking about leadership as the main theme of this podcast. So if we think about that, can you talk a little bit about some of your first experiences of leading? I know you've done many things in your career in Japan and many different avenues you've gone down, but just thinking back to your early experiences of leading here, what was challenging, what was different for you?
So first of all, I came to Japan just straight from university. So I cannot really compare to management in my home country, which is Germany. I really came straight from university. And the first thing I did was starting up small breweries. So it was in the countryside, usually people who didn't speak much English. So the first barrier in anything related to leadership and management was very basic communication. So I think that's what leadership is. A lot of it is about. Really find a common way of communicating, being empathetic, and understanding always where the other side comes from. So I think that was the biggest challenge in all roles I had, in the time in Japan. I also spent 5 years in China, in Shanghai. So to find always the right way to communicate.
So Tim, if you think back, you're in the countryside in Japan. Well, if you go into the countryside anywhere in the world, the people are generally different. They've got a different style about them. In Japan is a country full of dialects as well. So you've got that sort of country dialect, thing as well going on, even if you're trying to learn Japanese. And you're talking about communication. So how long were you doing that job in the countryside? How long were you there?
I actually spent 5 years in Japan without visiting Tokyo once.
Whereabouts were you located?
So I was half a year in Fukuoka. I was half a year in Hokkaido,
yes.
Close to Sapporo in Otaru. I was half a year in Mishima, Shizuoka. I was 1.5 years in Yamagata. Then I spent almost 1 year again in the Kansai area before I came to Tokyo.
I'm counting at least 5 different dialects right there from that description. So eventually you're basically, it's even more complex because you're moving. So when did you sort of settle down in one place in Japan? Was this after you were in China, you came back? Or?
No, actually, I think the first place where I was feeling like home was in Yamagata. So that was also the longest time. It was so basically 1.5 years after I arrived in Japan. And it was also probably the most defining. It was. I was welcomed in the society. It was a small village that owned the brewery. So the only was owned by the city. The CEO was basically the mayor.
Oh, okay.
And they really let me in. But nobody spoke English, so we always had to communicate in very, very various means. And when you talk about dialect, I remember I had a very good connection to the sales director, and very humble. He came from a department store. He was managing a department store before he managed the brewery. And he understood always my way of saying things in Japanese. He did not speak a word of English, but he was translating what I tried to say into the Yamagata dialect. And when they were asking me something, he was kind of a translator.
Japanese to Japanese, yeah?
Without talking in any foreign language. So to answer your question, I think that was the first very defining moment in Japan.
Yeah, and I imagine too, countryside, Yamagata, small village, brewery is a big part of the community. You're accepted. And I can imagine that the people you had working for you would have been very proud to work for that brewery and be very, I guess, probably honoured that an expert has come from overseas, a brewmaster has come to their town. That would have been, you have been a high position in that culture and that society. So I'm sure that you noticed, I suppose, that there are some working attributes that the Japanese people have. Now, I've not lived in Germany, so I have no basis for what I'm about to say, but my impression of Germany is the artisan tradition, the guilds in Europe, had those in Germany too, and I remember seeing this TV program about carpenters would travel around Europe as carpenters to experience different ways of using their skills. There's such a seriousness about the trade, and I can imagine that I imagine there's some sort of similarity perhaps in that mentality between the Japanese side and the German side. But what did you notice about how the Japanese approach their work?
It's so great that you mentioned this, Greg, because this is exactly the reason why I say this was the first defining moment, because I felt that way. I felt like, you have been mastering this craft, and now I come for the first time that society and the people around me appreciate that, but it's also the other way around. Yeah. So the great story was in this. So the place is called Nishikawa, which is close to Sagai city. And very close to Gassan, which is the famous for summer skiing. So that's where the brewery is located. But also, the most famous Sansai Ryori restaurant called Dewaya is also in the same village. Oh. The CEO of Honda, every 3-4 times a year, was flying in with clients with a helicopter just to dine at that specific restaurant.
Wow, that's pretty spectacular.
And the owner was 92 years old.
Right.
And so I was invited. And certainly with this very famous, beyond the borders of Yamagata, famous Sansai Ryori restaurant, I had the honor to develop the beer matching. So the owner of the restaurant gave me this traditional Sansai Ryori dinner, and then basically I really developed the beer together with him based on his input. So coming back to your question, that's when I really realized that the Japanese shokuhin mentality and the approach of German craftsmanship are very, very similar. And that's why I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, amazing experience. So what happened after that? After you left the village, and where was the sort of next stage in your career in Japan?
So I have been supporting all these breweries, and then the reason why this was always happening in different countrysides was they were developing a lot of breweries at a very, very fast pace. Okay. But somehow this never, it plateaued at one point. So, and I loved being here. So I decided to go to Tokyo, and I basically started my own consulting business. And together with another German brewmaster partner, we were basically consulting breweries. We were trading with raw materials. We were doing services. We were selling them recipes and made sure that they had all the things they needed to run a successful brewery. So this is what I've been doing for in combination of the 5 years. So in total, around 10 years, I have been in the craft beer business. But then also towards the end, it was not only the craft breweries, it was also the larger breweries. And so it kind of expanded from the craft brewing into the brewery and the beverage industry.
Right. And when did you sort of settle on not the consulting, because consulting is basically you as a pair, I guess. You were not establishing a bigger company there, trying to hire people in, make it bigger, or just keeping it nice and tight?
No, actually we did in the end. It started as a consultancy, but where we were consulting raw material traders. But then we started actually trading ourselves. We had our own beer brand. So it kind of started as a consultancy. Right. But in the end, we had around 10 people, and it was a small company. But so what I came from university. I've been working as a brewmaster, and so I never have been really working for a company.
No.
So, and honestly, I kind of, two reasons. One was the craft brewing industry did not develop in Japan as fast as it did in other parts of the world. So it was kind of flat. And so one of our businesses at that time was trading with brewing equipment of breweries that went bankrupt. Which is not a very sustainable business model.
Very good sustainable business there, is it?
So, and then I asked myself, where is this going? And then I had the chance to join Döhler, which is a German-based food and beverage ingredient company. I have been working with them already on a project basis. And then when I had the opportunity, I decided, I will go for that.
To do what? This is Döhler. What do they?
It was very similar
what do they
to
have here.
What is so at that time they didn't have anything in Japan.
Nothing on the ground.
They just had relationships with trading companies, but they wanted to get their foot on the ground.
So they said, okay, Tim, you understand Japan, you understand the business. Please come in and set up our organization from zero.
Exactly.
Well, that's what year was that?
That was now 13 years ago, so 2009, around there.
Right, okay.
So, and
just after Lehman, basically.
Yes. So it was really like, at that time, there was like a 500,000 euro trading business. So I was working with Marubeni at that time, but also really developed relationship with Mitsui, Bussan, with Mitsubishi. So we really started working with trading companies. I did that for a year. Then I moved to Shanghai to be part of the management team of Döhler for Asia Pacific. So I was managing Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand out of Shanghai.
Okay.
Part of a management team there. And basically from Shanghai, I built the business in Japan as well. So I hired a general manager, we established an office, and then when the business was mature enough, I moved back from Shanghai to Japan. I took over the general management. Last year I was so Döhler was basically a sales and a trading office. So we didn't produce anything. And
how big did it get in that time?
So I was, when I left, the business was in Japan at 40 million euro, and we had 14 people.
14 people, right?
Yeah. So I brought the business from this 500,000 euro to 40 million euro.
Wow. Okay. Well done, Tim. Excellent job there. And I'm just thinking about people, when you had your consultancy and you started getting people to join, and you said it was only, I think you said 10 people, right? That's often extremely difficult in Japan to convince Japanese staff and convince their grandparents and convince their parents that they should go and work for this very small organization when they should go and work for some big, massive Japanese stable, company. And who are these two guys and how long is this going to last? And so it's not such an easy thing. In most countries in the world, I'm sure it's not that difficult, but in Japan, it can be quite difficult. So how did you work around convincing people to come on board with you, both in your consultancy and also with Döhler? So how did that work?
I think a lot of it has to do with passion.
Okay.
I'm a very passionate person. So I really love what I'm doing.
Right.
And I would hope that I have the ability to convey that to the people who potentially work with me and for the company I work and kind of a corporation always gives you the resources, the tools, and the whole umbrella. But at the end of the day, business is done between people. So I think to come back to your question, the tool with a lot of things was always trying to convey the passion I have for doing things.
And so when you started Döhler, you hired only the general manager, then he hired everyone, or you were hiring them together, or you hired them and he was one of them?
I was always. I mean, this is like, when we talk about leadership, I think this is the most important thing is to really have no compromise on people.
Yeah.
So I understood that from a very early point. As you said, it was much more difficult to hire talent for a small consultancy than it was for Döhler or now for Symrise.
Yeah.
So and so you have to find the ways to attract this talent. So I was always hands-on with that.
Right. And so how long were you with Döhler then altogether?
12 years.
12 years, right? And then Symrise has been how many years ago now?
1.5 years.
1.5. So this is quite recent, right? Yeah. So when you think about your experience with Symrise now, which has got how many people altogether?
77.
77.
Yes.
Oh, that's a very good number, isn't it?
Yes.
77.
But I also have to say, so I'm not the president. I'm reporting to the president. I'm the country director for the flavor division. So we have 3 divisions.
Okay.
The fragrance division, that's everything you put not in your mouth in terms of flavor. So everything that goes into perfumeries or into detergents and things like that. So that's one division. And then the flavor division, which I'm heading, which is everything that goes into food, beverage, and tobacco. And then the third division is an ingredient company we acquired. They do natural extracts. And next year, we're actually starting to integrate that into the flavor division.
Okay. Into your division, so it's going to be even bigger.
Yes.
So when you think about the experiences you've had in Japan, what has worked well for you in terms of getting people to be highly engaged in their work?
Again, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think the most important thing is to find the real motivation of what drives people. And that's also something that I tend to think is a little bit different in Japan than, for example, if I make a comparison to China, the biggest motivator, especially when I was there, was money.
Money, very simple, isn't it?
Very simple.
Very pragmatic.
You pay more, you get the better people. In Japan, it's not like this. So to come back is like, you really need to understand what drives the person and take that angle to really get them on board and let them buy in to your goals and strategy, or the team goals and strategy. So I think that's a key starting point to really make sure that you get the best out of the people.
And, that sounds simple, find out their motivations, right? But, Japanese people are somewhat conservative and, maybe not that easy to open up to a foreigner, or even to another Japanese for that matter, probably, about their most deep-seated emotions and motivations and goals and, where they want to go. So how do you actually find those things out, and how do you get the trust that they'll actually tell you?
Yeah. So it's, again, actually quite simple.
Okay.
Because yes. Yeah, we all know that there's always a reluctance to change and to get out of the comfort zone. But a very pragmatic way to do that is to show, how it could be. So let's say we make an agreement. I start by getting you desire to do something that is different from what we are doing. And we actually do that together. And in that process, to the outside, I actually keep back. So I enable you to drive that change. When that goes to the right direction, because a lot of times it doesn't work, because we are not like descent from heaven and everything we do is... So as soon as I see that this goes towards the right direction, I retreat more and more and let the success be handled by the Japanese.
Right.
When I see this going the wrong direction, I take over, I take the blame, I do the apologies, and then we can start over because you trust me now.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I am a person of my words. And if things are going downhill, I'm actually helping and supporting. But if things go good, you get the glory. It never, and it's always a teamwork. It
Yes.
never goes black and white. But I
Yes.
think that's one of the things that always worked very well.
You know, I love to hear that, because often the Western model, and I'm thinking Anglo-Saxon Western model here, I don't know about Europe, I've not lived in Europe long enough to have any view on it, but is that the way to the top is over the bodies of your rivals and standing on the head of your subordinates, you know, and again, it's usually the other way around. When things go well, it was all me. When things don't go well, it was all them. You know, and that's quite the opposite view that you're talking about. So it's refreshing to hear that.
I think it's a very good point. And when I see this, yeah, I totally agree. And when I see this, I think this is one of the great things I learned from being self-employed, because, you know, the only thing that matters is the outcome.
Yeah.
That's all there is. So if you see people who like just, you know, feel some entitlement for a certain role, or it doesn't do anything. So that's also why I was always wanting to be hands-on, because I really want to, I like this term, like go to Gemba, you know?
Yep.
Go down, pull up your sleeves and help do things.
Go to the work site.
Yes.
Go to the
And by
factory
doing
or
that, you
production.
understand what everything, what actually drives things. And rather than, you know, going top down and tell people what to do.
Nice. And so if I think about that, having that mindset, I mean, there's one part of that, though, which is mistakes. Now, in many Japanese companies, there are no mistakes. There are no defects. There are no errors allowed. It's very clear, you know, and if errors, defects, mistakes are made, then it's taken very negatively, and particularly for those individuals. And some very harsh words and perhaps punishments will soon be coming along. So in that sense of how do you think about the best way in Japan to deal with mistakes? Because we're not, as you say, we're not perfect. Mistakes do happen. What have you found works well in handling mistakes when, and I don't mean strategic direction didn't work. Like, for example, if we as a collective team group decide, okay, we're going to go into this and it doesn't work, okay, that's all right. It didn't work. We tried it. But as a team, we decided. I'm talking about individual work where someone screws it up, you know. Well, how do we treat that? What is your view? What are your views on that?
Very simple again. You said individual. Take the individual perspective out of it. That's the key, because that's also my experience. There have been a lot of challenges in this company, in the company I've been before, and the Japanese colleagues tend to hook the mistakes that have been made to a certain individual, which might be right, but it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really, and that's more important, help. Because as soon as you hook that, then exactly what you're saying is happening. Like, oh, I don't want to be close to that. And then, a person gets alienated. So I believe the most important thing is you have to face the mistakes. Otherwise, you cannot learn from them. But you have to, as much as you can, take the individual effect out of that. And rather look at what has been done and why, and analyze what could have been done better and actually implement that, rather than pinning it to one person and punishing a person. And I think that's the most important thing to learn from mistakes.
Yeah, we teach leadership here in Japan, Tim, and when we're teaching this, we have a number of steps on handling mistakes, and we're teaching this to Japanese leaders. And I remember one Japanese executive, he said to me, the mistake. He said, when I was younger, I made a mistake. back in the old days, right, my boss threw an ashtray at my head. And you think, wow, okay, that's how seriously mistakes are taken in this country. Someone threw an ashtray at your head, they're so angry. So that's very interesting that you've got a different mindset around that, which is very good. And in terms of getting creativity from teams, now after the Japan's defeat in the war, and they were trying to reindustrialize, they weren't able to produce a high quality of products very easily. And so often they were making knockoffs and making copies. And in fact, I remember there's a town in Japan renamed itself USA, USA. So they could write "Made in USA" as the name of the town, right? Because they were so shy about saying "Made in Japan" because the quality concept wasn't there. And this whole thing around creativity and, Japanese can only copy. My experience has been that everyone has got creativity in them. And what usually prevents the creativity coming out is the environment, the leadership, and the system. But what has been your experience with creativity, getting creativity from your teams? What's been working well for you?
It's a very good point. And actually, I have to admit, this is the most challenging part. It is. Because it's an industry where there is no silver bullet. We are not having a new technology that all of a sudden can be implemented and is changing the whole food and beverage world. So you have to be creative with the resources you have. And so a lot of times it's just a combination cross-category, yeah? And so you have to be very open-minded, but you have to be open-minded as a team. It's not really like one person is not just like one person being creative doesn't really help because like as an example, if a developer comes up with a new way of creating taste and there's no way to actually produce that, right, then it backfires. Yeah, so it always has to be a holistic thing where it has to fit the regulatory requirements, it has to fit physical requirements, it has to be possible to be made with existing machinery. So creativity is really a team effort again. So, and my experience is that once you set a goal, the team can actually be very creative. But to define that first goal, what do we actually want to achieve? That's the most difficult part. And very effectful was always like, go drinking, or eating. Yes. Like really go a team building thing, go hiking, go outside of the work environment. Talk to different people and make them like ask questions and then inspiring them, saying, this is an idea. Why don't you talk to this person? And then all of a sudden you have somebody else coming back and then you find out what happened with another stakeholder. So a little bit of grassroots, like throwing the ball at each other was many times very effective when it comes to creativity.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Well, they say that, Henry Ford was quoted as saying, if I'd asked what people wanted, it would have been a faster horse. And in fact, Germany invented the car, right? The Mercedes, named after the daughter of the engineer in Germany who actually created the car. But Henry Ford, I guess we can give him credit for the assembly line. But he seems to have somehow gotten the credit for creating the car. But anyway, apart from that, he said faster horse. And Stephen Jobs is another one who said, look, right, forget the zip phone and forget the BlackBerry and all this stuff. I'm going to have all that in one thing. And I give people something they've never seen before. And he had that famous launching, that famous unveiling in the States when he was talking about all the things it could do in one time. But again, there's that element of it's not sequential, and a lot of the things that we just talked about now are sort of a Kaizen style approach of sequential improvements. What do you think about getting breakthrough improvements? Now, this might be where you come up with something that initially doesn't exist, but then you work out how to make that later, But if you didn't have that first idea, you wouldn't have gotten anywhere. So what are your thoughts on that?
Again, it's a very difficult question because I would love to have that kind of, possibility to do in the food and beverage. And maybe if I would be a Steve Jobs, I would see that. Yeah. But I'm not. So, but one example for you is what we are working on in the moment. You have a PET bottle. Mm-hmm. You have the closure, and in the closure you have a powder, and you push, and then the powder goes into the bottle. It's nothing you haven't seen before. But why is it not commonly available? It's not commonly available because, first of all, what has been there was just, a color gimmick, but then it's taste-wise inferior to a liquid because a powder doesn't taste better than a liquid. So you really need to think of an added value you put into this powder that makes it really exciting to buy that product in that format, right? So, and then it goes further. Most of the powders would be probiotic, and then they need to be chilled. So it's again not the groundbreaking thing, but to make that happen, you need to have a lot of people from very different disciplines coming together at one table and really coming up with groundbreaking ideas to make that one holistic thing. And that is something that really excites me. And also is very, for me personally, rewarding because, I'm coming from the technical side, but I'm now a commercial person. I also like the marketing part of, and how does the consumer react? So it's a very holistic way and a very rewarding because once you succeed, probably not as much, but similar to Steve Jobs when he actually saw his vision coming true, it must have been a very rewarding thing. And so that is one example we are working on where the key success factor is, to cut this short, to bring the best out of very different disciplines.
Have you come across any good brainstorming methodologies? For example, you gather the group of people who need to be in that room who are all bringing some aspect of the solution with them. That's fine. Well, how do we actually go about getting that group together to come up with ideas? Have you come across any particular methodologies you've seen that have worked well?
Again, it's usually very difficult to bring them in the beginning all at the to the table. In my experience, it's very fruitful to plant small seeds, or not only me. I mean, other people would plant the seed with me. Yeah, it's not a one-way road. It's really like, so you define stakeholders, and in parallel, in different groups, you work on certain issues, and then you let the whole solution already like kind of bubble and preliminary grow to a certain level before you try to connect it.
Okay.
And then and that's also actually quite Japanese, because you have an alignment. So
Yes,
once you have the big meeting, miraculously, and the boss from abroad comes, it's like, oh, everybody's already like on one page, but they don't see what has been happening before.
Yeah. All the pre-meetings and the pre-meetings.
All
and
the little
pre-meetings.
details where like everybody is like regulatory. I have a friend who worked at Diageo, the biggest liquor company on the planet, and he said, Tim, you know who are the biggest drivers of innovation in our company? The lawyers.
Oh, the lawyers. That's an unusual choice.
Yeah, because like they make it happen.
Right.
If they say you can't, you can't.
You can't, right, the lawyers.
So the commercial people would start to talk about every innovation with the lawyers first.
Wow, okay.
And if you think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I guess it makes sense.
It makes sense.
Scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, because a lot of times they came up, they did that all like, and they created something. Yeah, it took them 3 years, and then the lawyer said, no, I can't do that because of that.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And you talked a little before about trust, how you were spotting the shotlight on people when things went well, and you were absorbing the arrows when things didn't go well, and that's building trust. What other things have you found work well in building trust with teams here in Japan?
Empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I think building trust is the fundament, is understanding who you are, what are your values, what are no-goes, what do I like shouldn't be doing, and respect that, and vice versa, trying to do the same. So empathy is one thing, and the other thing is, especially in Japan, walk the talk.
Right.
Walk the talk. Say what you do and do what you say. You do that. Yeah. Then also, from a Western perspective, if mistakes happen, actually, if you said this is what we're going to do, and there was an alignment, and maybe the outcome is not as perfect, but as long as you documented everything and it was clear how it led to this, it's more shoganai than a mistake. So I think, and a lot of it, because trust is related to really go that path together, right? I think that's also a very important thing, that you make sure that you manage the expectations of your of the people that you want to build the trust with. And if things don't go the right way and you committed to something that just becomes impossible, be honest about it, talk about it, and say, I couldn't do that because of that.
Thank you. And what about culture? Because this quote is often given to Peter Drucker. Then other people say Peter Drucker never ever said this, but apparently he's alleged to have said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I say there are varying opinions on whether that statement is actually from Peter Drucker at all, but it's still pretty cool one-liner. It's one of those sort of snappy sayings you could just toss around. In fact, I heard it attributed to Warren Buffett by someone on another podcast recently. So it's even been morphing into other people's have said it now incorrectly or otherwise. But what do you think about culture? What have you found works well for culture build in Japan? From the company side. I don't mean Japanese national culture, I mean corporate culture.
Honestly, I'm not such a firm believer in corporate culture.
Okay, tell me why.
Or let me put it this way. Like, Symrise mantra is always inspiring more. Yeah, that's not a culture. That's a mission statement. That's who we want to be. And that is not a static thing. And a corporate culture, the way I perceive the name, is a static thing.
Right. Okay.
So I am a firm believer of this statement. When I come to Symrise, one of the reasons why I decided to join this company is because always inspiring more when it comes to taste, I can stand behind that.
You get behind that.
If you say that's corporate, that's how then if I bring this spirit as a manager into the organization that is developing corporate culture, then that would probably answer the question. But honestly, I think it's more a spirit than a culture.
Okay.
I believe in. And every company has that kind of umbrella rather than, a culture is like, there's probably a Symrise Japan culture, there's a Symrise Singapore culture, and they're all different. But what we have in common is always inspiring more taste.
Got it. And what about, you've been here a long time and you've had, as I say, a Renaissance man-style career here. What do you be some piece of advice you'd give to someone who is being sent to Japan to run the operation here?
Listen first.
Listen first, okay.
And don't complain.
And don't complain. That's good. I love that.
I've heard it so many times. Why do they do this? This is and the more you listen and the more you look at it in details, the more you understand that it's actually not such a bad thing.
So what you're saying there is you think that our initial impressions are not really able to see what's actually going on here. So we're leaping to conclusions. We're making judgments based on nothing. And this is
not nothing, but very limited.
Well, very limited,
very educated guesses, a lot of assumptions, like you're saying.
Right.
And before you really, really dive deep, go into details, be Japanese. That's what the culture is about. They're very, very much into the details.
Yeah.
So that is a very big piece of advice. Listen, and then you think you talk, listen again, and then maybe you got it.
One of the things, though, normally with your boarding pass when you're getting on the plane in the days when you could actually fly somewhere, we're in lockdown in Japan.
You have one?
The
I would
borders,
love a boarding pass to Germany right now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we used to have boarding passes. Well, we're in lockdown right now for the whole country. You can't leave Japan. You can't enter Japan, I should say. But part of that sort of departure pack you get from your company. Okay, Greg, you're going to Japan. We expect you to get this, and this fixed or done or changed or something. You're not able to just take your time and I'll do a lot of listening and I'll be very empathetic and then I'll get on my next posting to another country. You're usually under some sort of form of direction. You've got a boss somewhere you've got to report to. How do you harmonise what you're talking about here with that sort of pressure from people who don't know Japan, or even worse, they've been to Japan and they think they know Japan. So what do you think about that?
Okay, first of all, I really, I have experienced a lot of situation from the outside like this, yeah. But fortunately, I've never been in this position, really.
Right,
I mean, I have to say that. I mean, everybody I have worked with and for, in terms of superiors, they all have been very, very much trying to understand, and we had very constructive discussions. So it was always, especially now. So my current line manager, he's based in Shanghai, but he has been in Japan for quite a while. So you don't have to explain this to him. So I have never been in this situation myself, but I have been seeing it many times. So, and I have to say it's tough because you do need time. And you do need that understanding. So a lot of people I see, they are on a mission impossible.
Right.
They're literally on a mission, impossible. Because, like, take, for example, today I was talking to a gentleman who runs a foreign pasta brand company.
Yeah, I know him. He's actually also been on this interview.
Very, very impressive things they have done with the brand. Yeah, but the key in Japan is distribution. Yeah. So what he was telling me about their challenges with distribution, I mean, to do that, yeah, you cannot just. There is not a quick fix to this. You really need to have the time and the resources to really make change here. So the only way it works is to really make the key stakeholders understand. And behind that, if you want to really change something as a manager in Japan and you do not have the 100% backing of the people around you and above you, I think you are set up for failure. I've not seen any example where like that would have worked. And if it did, I would like to meet that person and learn from her or him.
How they did it, right?
Exactly.
How did you do the impossible, Mission Impossible? You did it well. Should they learn Japanese, do you think?
Very good question. I think so. For example, it would be very un-Japanese to say I speak Japanese. I'm terrible. Mada dame desu. Mada renshu shinai to ikenai desu. So, but I have some kind of fluency. But today, in this environment, and most of the time I've speaking Japanese. Now I go back to English.
Oh, really? Why is that?
To keep a neutral communication base. To avoid nuances of misunderstanding. Oh, Tim said that. I didn't say that.
Right.
But in English, I'm on a neutral level of communication where it's much easier to say, I didn't say that. But in Japanese, maybe it came across that way because it's not the same level.
But we get that in English too, you know. You say something in English and then someone takes it a different way.
But you hear me.
I didn't mean that, you know.
Yeah.
So we have the same problem, I think.
But yes, we do. But when we talk about language, let me counter to that. You're right. But I would say there's a very distinct difference between Japanese and English. English is very direct. It's very straightforward, yeah? And Japanese is exactly the other way around.
Yes.
You experience, you know what I'm talking about, right? So sometimes we as foreigners, we hear our Japanese fellow colleagues talking about something and we understand where their misunderstandings are because we have the sensitivity because of that. Going back to your question, I don't think it's necessarily a key success factor. I've seen a lot of people who have managed to be very successful without mastering Japanese. But the language is the key to the culture and understanding all these things that we are talking about today. So learning the language is a key to understanding it better and to be more empathetic. And secondly, it's much more fun.
Yeah, it is much more fun.
You're sitting, I mean...
Even when you make mistakes, it's more fun, right?
I mean, you know, yesterday I was like, after a meeting, I just went alone into this izakaya in Shinjuku, sit at the bar, and it would be so boring if I wouldn't have been able to speak to the guy behind the counter. We had a great fun, and he wouldn't have been able to speak in English.
So what's your definition of leadership?
Actually, I told you before. Today, I've
been to the meeting,
I've been to a very great.
This question is already in there, so this is good timing, right?
Yeah, and so what I say now, I just learned today.
Yep.
Yeah, I truly believe that the definition of leadership is inspiring change.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. Inspiring and driving change.
Especially challenging here, I would suggest. You know, I wonder about what you think in the Japanese context. Okay, you could have a definition like that, but to actually get change here is very, very, very difficult, I think, compared to a lot of other countries, because it's the nature of Japan to resist change, actually, probably the nature is just change everywhere, but I think they're particularly good at it here. So what do you think about that definition as its workability in Japan?
So, it's almost a philosophical question, yeah, because I believe that the resistance to change is so embedded
Yes.
in the culture
Yes.
and goes back hundreds of
Yes.
years,
Yes. Yes.
and is one of the key success factors. If you look at what Japan has achieved, it's astronomical.
Yes.
It's really an unbelievable success factor in terms of the total wealth, the distribution of wealth. It's a fantastic place to be. But today, what I heard is like what got us here will not
get us where we want
get us any further. And why is that? Why is that? I truly believe that if humans still exist in many thousands of years, when they look back to the time now, really in the range of plus minus 2-3 decades, it's a turning point.
Right, okay.
Industrialization and the globalization and the capitalism that drove that, the modern capitalism, that is done. That is not sustainable anymore. Yeah, we need to change climate. We need to change our way of thinking with society. We need to rethink the ways of working. And COVID has shown this to Japan in a very, very fast way. So I think that it was a great strategy. You know, everybody was changing around and they drive this big ship with this unbelievable unity and just continue doing that.
Keep going forward.
And see what's going on and slowly adjusting, but this big tanker is just going into one direction.
Right.
But this tanker has to change course now.
Yeah.
Because aging population, like all these things, we don't want to go too much into details. So you and it's challenging because you need to really embrace change into a culture that actually has been built on resisting it. But I truly believe, as looking from the outside, I will never be Japanese. That now is really the time to change, to give a prosperous future to a younger generation of Japanese. And in order to do that, everybody has to work together to get a lot of things done differently.
Well, on that note, let's pull it up there because there's an entirely different podcast right in those last few words you mentioned, which we could go into in much more depth, but we'll pull it up here. So thank you very much, Tim. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.